There are two different ways of buying a Citroën C6. You can have petrol or diesel or electric. No, you can't have electric. But which one of these two is better? There's only one way to find out. Is there? No, there's not. The petrol car is undoubtedly the more simple. The diesel, nah. The other thing with the diesel is it's a 2.7, but I think this engine is bigger. Because although this is a 2.9 litre V6, it's smaller, look. It's tiny. Well, it's entirely possible I haven't quite sussed this out. The diesel engine is complicated. It has a nappy on the top of it. Well, it looks like a colostomy bag of some sort. There are pipes and hoses and all kinds of chaos, and to be honest with you, it scares me, which is worrying because it's my car. Petrol is much more simple. This engine is old school. It's mid-90s. But which is the better way to go? If you want to buy a C6, should you buy petrol or should you buy diesel? Whoever asks that question anyway? Well, I'm asking it. Two cars, same colour, same trim. Which is best? I mean, to be honest with you, the best way of deciding would probably be just to drive them rather than organising some kind of fight. So I'll just drive them instead. I think I will start with the petrol. For those who don't follow my channel, why don't you? For those who don't, I have my own Citroën C6. It's the Citroën C6 that I bought for £750 during lockdown. This is not my C6. Hashtag not my C6. This is a customer's C6, but this is quite a rare C6. And for that reason, I thought it would be interesting to compare it to my C6. As you might be able to hear, but you might not because it's quite quiet. This is a petrol C6. And that makes it quite rare. Very rare, because they only sold a handful. And I thought it would be interesting to compare this to my diesel C6, which is a much more common specification of C6. This car is also slightly older than mine. But it has done 100,000 miles less. This has only done 62,000 miles, and mine's done 160. But otherwise, the trim is largely the same. This is an exclusive model. It's slightly earlier than mine, so it doesn't have the electronic steering column, which is a massive fail because that's really cool. But for all intents and purposes, it's kind of the same car, really. The engines are very different. They're both V6s, but where the diesel has a kind of more up-to-date 2.7 litre twin turbo V6 diesel, common rail and everything like that, this is a bit more old school actually. This is a 2.9 V6. I don't care if they say it's a 3 litre. It's 2,946 cc.
2.9.
This engine started its life in kind of mid-90s really. It was in the Xantia V6, which I have one of those as well. It was used in the 406, the 406 Coupe. It was used in the Renault Clio V6. It's been used in many different cars. But this is probably one of the rarer combinations you'll find, perhaps other than a C5. Mark III C5 with this engine, but the thing is, does it actually work in this car? That's the question, because if most of these cars were diesels, and why was that? Was that because they were better, necessarily, or was that because, I don't know, well, was that because they were better? Power-wise, the C6 petrol actually has the advantage. It's rated at 211 horsepower at about 6,000 RPM, which means you've got to get it spinning, which is good fun if you want to build a Xantia track car. But it's not necessarily what you need for a lusty barge. The diesel obviously has a little less. We'll go into the diesel when we're driving it, but the bigger difference is the torque output, because this can only muster up 213 pound-feet, or whatever that is in Newton meters, at around, well, it's about 3,700 RPM. So that's mid-rangey. Whereas the diesel can muster up 100 pound-foot more at almost half the engine speed. Although, granted, the diesel's total range of engine speed is a lot lower because it's a diesel. They use the same gearbox, they use the same suspension. A lot of it is the same. So really, it's just down to how these engines behave, how they differ in their character, and how they deliver their energy, basically. And for that purpose, I'd say the diesel has definitely got something on the petrol. Because, wow, look at that. That is bright. The diesel has grunt when this doesn't. Now at this kind of speed, we're doing 30 mile an hour, and at this kind of speed, it's not noticeable. In fact, if anything, this is nicer to drive at lower speeds. It's more responsive on the throttle, as you'd expect, because it's not a diesel. And it's quieter, it makes a nicer noise, it's smoother. Around town, if you're driving a C6, this is what you want. And that's fitting, because the guy who owns this C6, he lives in London. This car lives in London. It lives within Greater London. And of course that puts it well inside the ULEZ, even before they've expanded it. And that's difference number one. This car is ULEZ compliant. The diesel, the 2.7, is not. But when the roads speed up, and when you want a bit more from it, when you're on the motorway, or when you're just trying to go up a long hill, basically, that's when you start to notice in the petrol that it's not quite got the grunt of the diesel, which is strange, because in olden times you would assume that the diesel was just the slower one. The diesel was cheaper, and the petrol was faster. Petrols go faster, diesels go further. That was kind of the old saying, wasn't it? But that's not the case in the C6, because the diesel goes further and it goes faster. 0 to 60 on the petrol was rated at about 9.5 seconds. In the diesel, 8.9, 8.8, something like that. Top speed, well, they'll both do 140 apparently, and I've no reason to not believe it, actually. But it doesn't really matter, does it? You don't do that. But they'll both sit at high speed on the motorway with absolutely no issues at all. But this just doesn't have this punch in the middle. This doesn't have. Because this car's done 60,000 miles, I can feel the grain on the steering wheel and on the gear knob. And that's new to me, because mine doesn't have that. Mine's more like a bin liner. Another difference with this car and my car, and to be fair, this is just a symptom of my car, is that my car's got a problem with the gearbox, and has done since I got it. One of the reasons it was 750 quid. This car doesn't have it, and it's quite interesting to drive one without the issues, because some of the things that's very frustrating about my car are not present on this one. So in many ways that makes me feel sad, because it kind of ruins mine a little bit. However, in many ways I'm feeling very good about my car, because this is quite smooth, but it's no smoother than mine. Mine rides just as well as this, I would say. Maybe the impression of how smooth it is in this car is better because of the engine, because you just can't feel the engine at all. This car does have a knock on the front. One of the front subframe bushes is on its way out, so there is an occasional thump. It's not quite as sharp round the corners. Of course, it doesn't have purple bushes, does it? Watch my purple bush video for that. But yeah, I mean, it's a lovely thing to drive, and it does suit the character, I suppose, of what the car is a bit more than the diesel does. But at the same time, it's really alien, because the diesel is, oh god, that was awful. The diesel is I'm so used to having a diesel engine at the front with two turbos that, you know, all you can hear is whistling when you accelerate. It's bizarre. It actually feels older. Car feels older. Probably because the engine's more old school. I think it sounds better though, what do you reckon? Yeah? Not that you can really hear it. Apparently it does have an active flow exhaust, but I'm not convinced. Weight wise, they're roughly the same. I mean, this one's a bit, this is a little bit lighter. It's an all alloy engine, the 3 litre V6. No, 2.9. Whereas the diesel uses, it doesn't actually use an iron block, it uses a steel block. It's quite weird driving one with a rev counter in front of me that goes up to 7. I mean, this is a really underrated engine. It was used in Peugeots, it was used in Renaults, it was used in, you know, the Xantia V6, the XM, the C5. It was used in the 406 coupe, the 407 coupe, but the engine did change once. There are 2 variations of the engine, apart from the Clio ones. You get the ES9 J4, and then the ES9 J4S. This is an ES9 J4S, which came out in about 2000, and it has variable valve timing. So the original J4 is what was used in the Xantia V6, the early XMs, Peugeots, blah blah blah. And you open the engine bay on those, they look quite funky actually. Alloy rocker covers, you've got the HT leads all in a nice little line. Whereas this one's kind of like a bit plastic fantastic. Actually, in many ways, it's quieter. It's got more catalytic converters. And this one's got 2, from what I can tell. It's quieter, it's a bit smoother, but it has variable valve timing. And believe it or not, the cylinder heads on this very car, Mark III Fiesta, the cylinder heads on this very car, developed by Porsche. It has an active spoiler, it has active suspension. I mean, the diesel has all this too, but it is nicer at low revs. If you're considering C6s, the petrol is definitely nicer at slow speeds. Of course, my gearbox is knackered, so that might be the difference, but so we're doing 30 miles an hour, and then that's foot down, take it to 60, that's 60. We're in a slightly twisty road now. Let's engage sport mode on the suspension. So one of the main differences between the petrol and the diesel is the range. The economy, the diesel is better, you would expect that, but it's not massively better. But what that means is that you get a range, believe it or not, of 100 miles less. The range on this car is around about 410 miles on a tank, and on the diesel it's 510. So you think, wow, that's quite a big difference. However, at the time of recording this, diesel is a hell of a lot more expensive to buy than petrol. So those savings may not actually go very far. And then you add in the fact if you live in London, if you're unlucky, or if you live in one of the other cities that are going to bring in these low emission zones, the petrol's going to save you £12.50 a day. Now you can of course get a later diesel. They did a 3 litre version of the V6 diesel engine. That is ULEZ compliant, but they're always for sale for huge money. And they are largely the same car. They're just a bit improved. They're a bit better. They've got a bit more power, a bit smoother, a bit cleaner, a bit nicer to drive. But it is still a C6. And there's also a 2.2 litre manual 4-cylinder C6. They are a bit more basic. They're more like a C5 really, mechanically. But again, those are ULEZ compliant. They don't have some of the toys that this has, like the active damping, although on this car it feels a little bit under-damped at the front. The active spoiler, which pops up in 2 different stages. This is an exclusive trim, same as my diesel, so it's got largely got the same toys. I've got heated seats front and back, electric seats front and back, sat nav, loads of stuff. I can't remember what they've got. I mean, the petrols, let's just try it in manual. So we go, we're in 5th there, 4th. Let's pitch her in. it's nicer around the corners, just because you've got a petrol with petrol throttle response and petrol noise. I mean, you can't really hear it, and it's a good engine as well. This is a really underrated engine. But that's not the sort of driving you do in a C6. The sort of driving you do in a C6 is just wafting and cruising, basically. Coincidentally, this car is the same storm grey that my car is. Exactly the same paint colour. But this car was built in June 2006, which makes it a very early C6. It wasn't registered until April 2007. Well, you might think that's a bit of a gap. But my own car was built in April 2007 and not registered until September 2009. Sat around for 2.5 years before someone decided they would spend £38,000 on it. I imagine they didn't spend £38,000 on it. So I'm going to go a slightly different test route to my normal one today, because it is only right that we go on a motorway. We're in a C6. The motorway is a C6's home. And in fairness, that is where they come alive. I can't hear the engine at all. I don't think I can. No, I can hear the tyres. Bit of wind noise in this one. So we're doing 55, go for the overtake, half throttle, 65, 66, 68, 70. There's just not an awful amount of go. It's really not that quick when the speed gets up. But around town, it's wonderful. It's a joy around town. It's very light. The throttles are, the control is very light. It's very smooth. Perfect car for driving around town. But in terms of actual performance, you want the diesel. You really do. So I'm doing a corner here at 45. It's not really leaning that much at all, to be fair. 46. I'm not even in sport mode. It's leaning a bit, but it's not. I've left the Mini behind that was behind me. One of the drawbacks with a C6 in the UK is you have to deal with C6 road tax, which is bad. In fact, the petrol is higher than the diesel, and the diesel's bad, because back in the early 2000s, the government told everyone that what we needed was diesel cars, because diesel cars didn't pump out as much CO2 as petrol cars. And therefore they were kinder to the environment, and therefore they would tax them less. So in many cases you'd have a petrol car and pay X, and then have a diesel version of it, and it would be much cheaper. In the C6 it wasn't a massive difference between the two, but there was a difference. Of course, many years later they figured out, oh, actually diesels are quite bad for you. Yeah, they're not good for the air. But with the petrol, you're looking at £660 per year. The diesel, 630, unless you have a C6 that was built before the end of March 2006, which you probably won't. But if you do, it's half as much to tax one of those. Or registered, sorry, registered before the end of March. And there's not many of them. But if you find one, you're laughing. If you like the sound of the petrol C6, well, I mean, if you want to buy one, you can't be very picky. The reason you can't be very picky, well, you can't be very picky with many C6s, admittedly, although there are always a fair few for sale, considering they're quite rare cars. But the petrol is really rare. How many petrol C6s do you think are registered on the roads in the UK? I'll go around this roundabout and let you guess. Wrong. Or unless you weren't wrong. In the UK, there are 19. This is one of 19. So yeah, if you want one, you can't be picky. If it comes up for sale and you want it, you're going to have to pay the man or woman who's selling it, because they can pretty much ask what they want. If you want their car. In urban driving, petrol's nicer. It's also a lot more simple. What's an absolute pain here is that I've forgotten my mic. You know. So you'll have to excuse the sound difference. I hope you can hear me. It's a quiet car, so you should be able to. So now we're into the diesel, which is odd because the interior in this car is light and airy and welcoming, which is what you would associate with a petrol. And the diesel you would associate with being dark and greasy and dirty. Well, it's the other way around. So it's a bit unfair because I haven't got the mic, so you'll be listening and thinking either this is much quieter or much louder than the one before. Unfortunately, because the microphone has changed, because you're now on the camera's microphone, it's not really a fair indication. So you're going to have to take my word for it. The diesel noticeably is louder. It's not as smooth at low revs. I mean, it is still a V6, as I say, but for a diesel it's pretty smooth, but it's not as smooth as that petrol. To compound things, my own car here has done 100,000 miles more, and it has a slightly poorly gearbox. On the plus side, it's my car, so I can just hammer it. I can just like pitch it into corners like that, you know. Doesn't matter. Hoof it around. Yeah, hoof it around like a race car while obeying the speed limit. But yeah, there are a few differences between the cars. The factory differences between the cars, well, predominantly it is the engine, while the petrol is the more simple of the two. You know, it's a petrol V6, fuel injected, yeah, okay, quad overhead cam V6 with variable valve timing, but for all intents and purposes, the petrol is the more simple car of the two. I think my sun visor down. The diesel, much more complicated. Still a V6, but twin turbocharged with intercooler and other stuff. Because it's a diesel, it's got all the modern DPF and, you know, EGR systems and everything. It's very complicated. There is no space in the engine bay left unused, whereas in the petrol it's not too bad. The petrol engine sits a lot lower in the engine bay itself, has less stuff bolted to it. Both 60-degree V6 blocks, but yeah, the petrol is definitely the one that's got more room around it. The diesel also has things like active engine mounts. The petrol doesn't, because it doesn't need them. One thing the diesel does have going for it at the moment is the speed limiter is working. So the petrol, it wasn't working, it was non-functional. So I've set it to 30 mile an hour, I put my foot flat down, and I'm doing 30 mile an hour. It won't let me go over it. It's actually very useful. It doubles up as cruise control if you go through the menus. But I can hear the diesel engine. I can hear the fact that it's a diesel. Hear the fact that it's a diesel. What quality content. As I say, my gearbox is a little poorly. It's effectively driving without a torque converter. That's the symptoms. But the gearbox is the same gearbox as the petrol. The suspension's the same. This is an exclusive model, same as the petrol. It has the lounge pack, so it's got all heated electric seats, all Saxo in topaz. It's got all electric heated seats all round, same as the petrol did. Although this does have the electric steering column, which is for winners. It also has a slightly updated, don't like them when they're open. It also has a slightly updated infotainment system. This is still a 30 limit. My foot is flat to the floor, and as soon as I click this button, like now, away we go. Before braking again. So one of the things I was worried about with this car, having this other one come in, which is owned by a viewer, this petrol, hello Ray, was that my leggy £750 160,000 mile C6, nearly 161,000 mile C6 with one or two problems might not come up well. But I've realised actually that this isn't bad at all. It's got a gearbox fault, fair enough. Ride-wise, this is maybe very, very slightly not as smooth as the petrol was. But could that be placebo because the engine was smoother? This handles better. The brakes are better in this. I mean, it's just... I mean, this is on... Yeah, look at that. That's on soft mode. And it's just got so much grip. This is also running different tyres. The other one was running Michelin's. This is running, I don't know, Ticket to Rides or something. And it actually feels just as quiet, rolling along. If anything, it feels a little bit quieter. There's less tyre noise. It feels like there's more grip. Although the Michelin's hadn't bedded in, of course. They're brand new. These aren't brand new. I also have on the front of this car purple bushes. Viewers of the channel will recall me fitting the purple bushes. Taking absolute ice age to fit the purple bushes, but they are in there and I'm feeling that effect. There is a little bit more feedback through the front. And driving gods will hear that and go, oh, that's good. Not really. You're not in a C6. You don't want feedback. I want to be completely isolated from everything. I don't want to feel what's going on through the road. That's for peasants. I want to waft majestically over the top of it. So the diesel car uses it's a Ford-based engine. I mean, it's kind of a joint project between Ford and what was PSA. The engine's built in Dagenham and has more Ford badges on it than Citroën and Peugeot badges on it. That's all I'm saying. It's a DT17TED4 something or other. It's basically a 2.7 and actually is the size it says it is. It's a 2,721cc 60-degree V6 diesel engine with twin turbos. And it produces a Toyota to pull out in front of you. It produces 200 and something horsepower, 201, 202, something like that. But crucially, the difference is giving away about 10 horsepower to the petrol, but crucially the torque produced at the flywheel is quite different. In this car it produces 325 pound-feet of torque at 1,900 revs. So with the petrol producing about 220, no, not even that, 213 was it, pound-feet? At 3,700, this is producing 100 pound-feet more at about half the engine speed. It's got longer range, as I say. It can do 100 miles more on a tank. A little bit more weight over the front wheels. Oh god, that bump. A little bit more weight over the front wheels. To be honest, you wouldn't really notice it. As I say, it has a longer range, and certainly if you're doing long distance driving, if you're going to use a C6 for what a C6 is meant for, the diesel does make more sense. Let's do the performance down the hill test. It has some mid-range guts to it that the petrol doesn't have. One of the things I noticed with the petrol is that even though it's a near 3 litre V6, when you're driving down a road and it's a long slog and you're going uphill, you're having to give it some throttle because it just doesn't pull as well as this. I would be surprised if the 2.2 manual C6 was much slower than the 3 litre petrol. 2.9 litre petrol. But yeah, my car is running poly bushes on the front, so the turn-in is a little bit better. I don't think the ride suffered particularly. In fact, if anything, this car does feel a bit more composed. The other car felt a little bit underdamped at the front. This one feels a bit more pointy. Like you can hoof this one around a bit more. But what I can't get away from is the fact that the engine in the other car was just so sweet. Especially at low revs, it was just a lovely thing. This is gruff by comparison. It's not bad for a diesel, it's pretty smooth for a diesel. But by comparison, it's gruff. It sounds a bit like a bus. I'm half expecting it to go when it slows down or when I stop. Brakes feel slightly more reassuring in this than in the other car. I say this is a slightly later C6, but I don't think it's later to the point that it received any of the updates that, you know, it's got the electric steering column. There were some suspension updates. I don't think this car's had those. This is doing all right. This cost £750, this car. But the reason it's £750 is because it had problems. And even if it hadn't had problems, these cars really, supply is outstripping demand. There is always a C6 for sale in the classifieds. There's always a V6 HDI for sale, and there isn't a petrol. And I can't help but think that at the moment there are more C6 diesels around. I mean, there are about 330, I think it is, in the UK, compared to the 19 petrols. But I think if you want a diesel, you'll find one, and the prices of them can vary wildly. I mean, there's a pretty good one, a black one was for sale in London the other day for £2,500. I don't know if it's still about, but then you'll see another one for £8,000, which has done more miles and older, and, you know, arguably worse, just because it's at a dealer, and no one really knows. Oh, Mark III Fiesta. Deja vu. If you want a diesel, you can be picky. If you want a C6, you can be picky. But if you don't want it to be a 2.7 HDI, you can't be picky. You're just going to have to buy what you find. 2.2s pop up occasionally. 3 litre HDIs, not very often at all. And 3 litre petrols, well, they don't pop up ever because
There aren't any, because they're 2.9s.
I have to knock mine out of gear when I stop because of my gearbox woe. So we go, we're heading along again to the national limit. So let's see what this does. 30 mile an hour. Take the speed limiter off now. It was a bit clumsy coming out of gear there. Oh yeah, that's 60 already. It actually hit 60 slightly before I said it. Yeah, brakes are nicer in this. Turning's nicer. Ride, I mean, that's the thing you're judging it on, really. It's pretty much the same. I mean, the other one might feel slightly smoother because of the engine. When the speeds increase, this one's actually riding better, I think. But as I say, the other one does have a subframe problem, so we put it in sport mode. That's one thing we noticed on the earlier car. Sport mode didn't seem to do much. Whereas on this, it's more noticeable. I mean, one of the things with C6s is people go on about, oh, you know, if you want a speed machine, you're looking in the wrong place. I don't know. It depends what sort of speed you want. If you want driving like fun and enjoyment and herring around, then yeah, you're looking in the wrong place. If you want to go fast from A to B without trying, this is a really good car for it. It really can cover ground. I mean, you don't have to slow down much. You can just hurl it into corners. Like you just... There's curbs coming and bumps halfway around. Oh no, there's no issue. It's just I'm on the limit pretty much there. That's the speed limit. Near enough. There's no driving involvement. I'm just pointing and squirting. I'm nearly getting air. You just can't feel what's going on. But if you just want to go from A to B quickly, you might get held up by a tractor. It is more agricultural, there's no getting around that. The economy on the car is better than the petrol. The tax is marginally cheaper. I was going to obviously get to this point and start going into the manual mode and then changing gear like this and being all sporty like I was in the petrol, but truth be told, there's no point, because honestly petrol's got it licked for that. Diesels just aren't fun in that kind of way. That's not what its strength is. The diesel's strength is in just pointing and squirting. And you know, the other thing that surprises me is the car with the dark interior feels older. Oh, but it is. Yes, it is. But it feels more dated inside. This is not a young colour. This is not a modern colour. You don't see modern cars with this colour interior. But for some reason, this feels more fresh. I don't know why. With its grubby seat belts and its steering wheel where all the beige is coming off. Or cream, it's not really beige, is it? I don't know why that is. The black one, you'd think the black one would feel more contemporary, but it doesn't. It felt like an older car. Maybe it's because all the Citroens I've ever known have had dark plastic interiors, like BXs and Xantias and things like that. It's all like dark plastic and all quite gloomy. Maybe that's why it just feels a bit older, but he is going very cautiously around this corner, isn't he? He's taken that very wide. So is the petrol beating the diesel, or is the diesel beating the petrol? Well, I can't speak for the 3 litre diesel versions. I've not driven one. I imagine they're just like this, only a bit better. I've not driven a 2.2. They don't have active damping, so they may be better than this. They might be worse, they might be better, I don't know. So I can put it back in drive now, and it's using the internal clutch in the gearbox to slip at the moment. It's not the torque converter. Wow, he's keen. In terms of, I mean, there is a rattle in here that the other one doesn't have, but I know what that is. The door card's broken. Someone's over tightened the screw on it and it's cracked, and that's creaking, and I keep meaning to take the screw out because I think it'll be better without it. In terms of build quality, considering this has given away 100,000 miles to the other one, there's no real rattles or anything like that. It's built quite well. The doors don't stay open on this. The check straps are absolutely shot. But at what the cars are built for, the motorway, I can still hear the engine, whereas in the petrol I couldn't really. Although there's less wind noise in this, and slightly less tyre noise, but I've got, yeah, see, I can just touch the throttle at any speed there and it'll just accelerate quite easily, whereas the petrol needed a bit more persuasion to increase its speed. And of course on the motorway, the diesel's economy, it will comfortably do 40 to the gallon. So I took this corner at about 45 in the petrol. I'm doing 48 at the moment. No, it's easy. I hit the apex. I'm having to slow down because there's a Golf slowing me down. To be honest, when you put your foot down in it, all you can hear is the turbos. So considering that this isn't a perfect example of a diesel C6, it's holding up. It really is. Bless you. Mind you, I've done a lot of work on it. It just feels a more modern car. I think it's because the engine is more modern. Even the sound the starter motor makes on the other one, it sounds like a Xantia starting on the petrol. Whereas on this, it sounds like something newer. And yes, it is a newer car, but this spec car and that spec car came out at the same time. It's just these examples are slightly different ages. So how would I summarise petrol C6 versus diesel C6? Unfortunately, I can't give you anything more than something entirely predictable and cliched, and that is, if you want to do a lot of miles, get the diesel, and if you do less miles, get the petrol, which is what everyone says about any car in the history of the world, but that is how it actually is. I'm afraid the diesel makes less sense in town because it's not quite as smooth, it's a bit more gruff. They don't like the short stop-start cold journeys. They're more complicated. They get stuck behind Toyota Yaris's. But on the motorway, the difference in noise is much more slight. I mean, obviously road noise and wind noise come into play more on the motorway than they do around town. So the diesel, the disadvantages the diesel has around town are not the same on the motorway. On the motorway, it's a much more even playing field. Around town, the petrol is more enjoyable. It's just got a lovely little purr to it. It's very smooth. The lack of grunt over the diesel isn't really an issue when you're just moving around at low speeds. You don't have turbo lag. There's not really much difference in performance at below 50 mile an hour. They're pretty much the same. But when they get going, the diesel certainly has more about it, but it comes at a cost. Slightly cheaper to tax, yeah, but not by much. But the main deciding factor is what you can find. Will you even find a petrol C6 to buy? My guess is not. So this is a bit of a pointless comparison really, because if you want a C6, it's more than likely going to be this one. Oh well, thanks for watching anyway.